The ongoing trade war between the United States and China, which escalated significantly after 2022, has catalyzed one of the most dramatic shifts in global energy trade dynamics in recent memory. While initially triggered by disputes over technology transfer, intellectual property rights, and the persistent U.S. trade deficit with China, the conflict has evolved into a far-reaching economic confrontation that encompasses nearly every major sector, from agriculture and electronics to heavy industry, and, most consequentially, energy. The resulting tensions have had reverberating effects across continents, altering long-standing supply chains, realigning diplomatic relationships, and forcing both global superpowers to reconsider their economic dependencies and trade strategies. Nowhere is this more evident than in the once booming energy trade relationship between China and the United States, which has been nearly dismantled and replaced with new, politically calculated partnerships. The early stages of the U.S.-China trade war were primarily characterized by rounds of tit-for-tat tariffs, with both nations targeting each other's key exports. The Trump administration, committed to the America First doctrine, began by imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, ostensibly to pressure Beijing into altering its trade practices. In response, China began to retaliate selectively, initially avoiding energy products, which were considered strategically important. However, as the dispute dragged on with little sign of resolution, energy became an unavoidable front in the economic battle. American crude oil and LNG, which had once been integral to China's energy diversification strategy, became pawns in a broader geopolitical chess game. Beijing's calculated move to reduce imports of American energy products was not merely a punitive measure. It was a strategic redirection of long-term national policy. In the mid-2010s, the energy relationship between China and the U.S. had shown significant promise. The United States, benefiting from the shale revolution, had emerged as a major exporter of both crude oil and LNG. China, on the other hand, was experiencing a dramatic increase in energy consumption due to rapid industrialization, urban expansion, and economic growth. With the U.S. producing excess energy at competitive prices, and China seeking to reduce its reliance on traditional suppliers like the Middle East, the alignment of interests created a mutually beneficial trade pathway. In 2017 and 2018, energy trade between the two nations was at its peak, with Chinese firms signing long-term LNG deals and importing millions of barrels of American crude. There were even early-stage investments proposed by Chinese companies in American LNG infrastructure projects along the Gulf Coast. At the time, it appeared that energy would remain a safe zone, insulated from political tensions. However, as the trade war intensified and tariffs proliferated across virtually every sector, this insulated zone evaporated. New data released by energy market analysts and trade monitors paints a stark picture. China has cut its purchases of American crude oil by over 90% and reduced LNG imports from the U.S. to near zero. This isn't just a shift in buying patterns. It marks a fundamental break in bilateral energy relations. In the face of growing hostility from Washington, Beijing has pivoted decisively, seeking alternative suppliers who can provide comparable energy resources without the same political baggage. This has ushered in a new era of energy diplomacy, where trade routes are now determined not just by price and proximity, but by political alignment and strategic leverage. One of the most significant beneficiaries of this shift has been Canada. Canadian crude oil exports to China have soared to historic levels, with Chinese refiners and state-owned enterprises increasingly favoring oil from the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. This heavy oil, once seen as technologically burdensome and economically marginal due to its complex extraction processes, is now viewed as a valuable asset. Canada's energy sector, which has long struggled with pipeline constraints and export limitations due to limited West Coast infrastructure, is seizing this moment as a rare opportunity to expand into the Asian market. In fact, Chinese buyers have reportedly doubled their purchases of Canadian crude over the past year, leveraging favorable prices and a relatively stable political relationship with Ottawa to secure long-term supply guarantees. The significance of this shift goes beyond volumes and pricing. By diversifying its energy supply away from the United States, China is sending a clear geopolitical signal. It is actively working to minimize its vulnerability to American influence in critical sectors. This decision aligns with a broader pattern in Chinese foreign policy, which increasingly emphasizes strategic autonomy and resilience in the face of Western pressure. By building robust trade ties with resource-rich nations that are not directly aligned with Washington, such as Canada, Russia, and key OPEC members, Beijing is constructing a multi-node energy security architecture that can withstand future geopolitical shocks. Russia, already a long-standing strategic partner of China in both energy and defense, has become another major player in this new configuration. Following the Ukraine conflict and the ensuing Western sanctions, Russia found itself in need of new markets for its vast energy exports. China, willing to overlook the geopolitical stigma attached to Russian crude, stepped in as a willing buyer. Chinese refiners are now purchasing Russian Urals and ESBO blends at deep discounts, in some cases $10 to $15 less per barrel compared to market averages. These discounts are not just commercially attractive, but also politically expedient, allowing Beijing to maintain a position of economic advantage while providing Moscow with a lifeline that helps offset the financial damage caused by Western sanctions. In addition to crude oil, LNG has emerged as another battleground. The U.S. had rapidly expanded its LNG export capacity in recent years, with major terminals built along the Gulf Coast aimed specifically at supplying Asian markets. China, the world's largest LNG importer as of 2021, had been a key target market. But tariffs, contract cancellations, and unofficial state guidance have nearly eliminated American LNG from China's energy portfolio. Industry sources report that U.S. LNG cargoes, once destined for Chinese ports, have been rerouted to Europe or Latin America. American LNG firms, banking on steady demand growth in East Asia, now face a more uncertain future, compounded by long transportation distances and growing competition from Qatar, Australia, and Russia. China, for its part, is moving swiftly to cement new LNG partnerships, including resuming negotiations with Australian producers despite recent diplomatic spats, and expanding its existing relationships with Qatar and Russia's Arctic LNG developers. While China diversifies its energy inputs, U.S. exporters are facing intense headwinds. Efforts to replace Chinese demand with buyers in Europe or Latin America are proving only partially successful. In Europe, political support for American LNG has grown since the Ukraine crisis disrupted pipeline supplies from Russia. However, this market is also highly price-sensitive and increasingly saturated. Latin America, while growing, cannot match the scale and strategic value of the Chinese market.